911 emergency.
I can't find my daughter.
9-year-old Valerie Jackson vanished from her Spokane, Washington home without a trace. The search for her whereabouts included almost every neighborhood and the area's mountain and forest regions. But the key to solving the mystery was an investigative tool 10,000 miles away in space. Spokane, Washington is a vibrant city, the center of an area known as the Inland Northwest. Many residents looking to raise a family settle several miles east of the city in the Spokane Valley, where the schools are good, crime is low, and families feel safe. Brad Jackson, a truck driver, and his daughter Valerie lived here in a home they shared with Brad's parents. Brad had sole custody of Valerie because the child's mother, Roseanne Pleasant, mysteriously disappeared 7 years ago. She had a drug problem. In October of 1999, Valerie had just turned 9 years old. She was a very bright fourth grader at the McDonald Elementary School, just a few blocks from her home.
Just saw a vibrant little girl. If somebody was in an argument, she'd try and mend it and fix it. And she was a great little girl, never got in trouble.
Monday morning, October 18th, started out just like any other school day until something went terribly wrong.
Find location of your emergency.
I can't find my daughter.
Okay, how old is she?
9.
Okay. She didn't go to school today?
No, we're just getting ready to go, and she went outside to play for a while because she was done early. And I can't find her.
She's a white female?
Yes, little redhead.
Brad said Valerie had been playing in the backyard with her dog while he was in the basement doing laundry. Later, he heard Valerie leave for school through the garage door.
And then he heard her go out into the front yard. He was very exact. He said exactly 8:32. He walked out the front door and found her missing, found her backpack laying on the front doorstep.
Valerie! Come on, Valerie, where are you?
Brad Jackson frantically searched the neighborhood, knocking on doors searching for his daughter before calling police.
Okay, what is she wearing?
She's got blue jeans with a dark blue down the side, purple socks, coat bright pink with I think with like little blue flowers on it.
That call mobilized not just police, but also a tightly knit neighborhood.
I got home at 9 a.m. and my mother-in-law called me about 5 after and said, there's a little redhead girl missing on Blossy, and I knew right away it was Valerie. So I raced over there. Brad was in the front yard. And I went over there and hugged him, and I said, let's find her.
Normally when we get missing kids, I mean, they're found either in the house or at a friend's house playing, you know, and they're cleared within 45 minutes at the most to an hour.
But the little girl was nowhere to be found. Valerie's grandmother made a televised plea for her safe return.
Please, whoever took her, we're asking for her safe return. Because Valerie, you know how we always hug and kiss every night, honey? Well, we're still giving them to you.
As the search continued, neighbors began calling police with leads.
so I'm right down the street from her. That little girl was kidnapped. I might have something that might be able to help you. Okay, what do you got? In the last couple weeks, there's been a blue blazer and a man about 6'2", light-colored hair.
Unfortunately, none of these tips checked out. Parents feared something sinister had invaded their quiet neighborhood.
We were all terrified. We wouldn't let our kids walk to school, and we didn't want ours to be the next.
Days went by with no sign of 9-year-old Valerie Jackson. Flyers were posted in stores, in car windows, and on the internet. Newspapers and television stations asked the community to report anything suspicious.
As a parent, you're concerned because I have a child the same age. That here there's potentially a person who's loose in the community preying on school children.
An abduction by a stranger was one possibility, but problems in the Jackson family suggested another.
The fact that her mother had been reported missing, was listed as a missing person since 1992, and that either her mother or someone for her mother could have taken Valerie.
But the last time anyone saw Roseanne Pleasant, Valerie's mother, was 7 years earlier in 1992. Roseanne's brother didn't believe his sister had anything to do with Valerie's disappearance. He pointed the finger squarely at Brad.
We believed that he had sold her into a pornography ring to get money. He was raising money for a reward, so we felt that once the money got high enough that he would pay someone off, or he had drug problems. We didn't know.
Detectives searched the Jackson home for clues. In Valerie's room were some bloodstains on her pillow. Brad Jackson told police that Valerie had a nosebleed the night before she disappeared. Police also found a prescription for Valerie for the antidepressant Paxil. They learned that the normally cheerful little girl was in counseling because of a stressful relationship with Danette Schroeder, one of her father's girlfriends. Danette and Valerie argued frequently and fought. Danette suggested to Brad that Valerie should receive therapy. That was when she was given the antidepressant medication. And forensic scientists found something else in Valerie's bed: 2 red hairs. They were identified as pubic hair and appeared to be similar to Brad Jackson's. But pubic hair can be transferred from room to room on socks. The evidence could be meaningless or an indication of sexual abuse. Police also thought it was odd that Brad Jackson was able to recall much more about Valerie's clothing on the day she disappeared than most parents would usually remember.
He knew exactly every article of clothing that Valerie Jackson was wearing. He was able to describe it to the police down to her purple socks.
And while Valerie did have a history of bloody noses, there was no other evidence inside the home to corroborate Brad's story.
I didn't find any evidence in the house other than on the pillowcases of her having a bloody nose. No evidence of her stopping the bloody nose, such as toilet paper, towels, or anything laying around.
With a search warrant, Jackson's pickup truck and automobile were searched for evidence. But police found nothing in either vehicle.
Grandparent, a brother or sister?
2 weeks after Valerie disappeared, residents of the Spokane Valley held a candlelight vigil, praying for her safe return.
Pray for Valerie.
Few knew at this point that the girl's father was a suspect.
He'd made statements to me. He knew he was being followed by the news media. There was neighbors following him all the time. He was always having to lose tails. He was very paranoid about it.
But surprisingly, police weren't following Brad Jackson at all. Why? Because they didn't have to. When police searched Jackson's car and truck for evidence, they left something inside of each vehicle. It was a device called a Global Positioning System, or GPS. 10,000 miles above the Earth, 28 global positioning satellites circle the globe. Each one beams back the precise time as kept by an atomic clock. Since the signals have different distances to travel and therefore reach the Earth at different times, a computerized receiver can translate that information into an exact position to within 30 feet.
The GPS receiver will record that location. If we move to another location, it will know the difference in time and how long we have spent at a time exactly to within milliseconds.
The location of the vehicle can then be monitored by the police. After the GPS transmitters were hidden in Jackson's vehicles, Detective Madsen took a calculated risk. He confronted Jackson with his suspicion that he had murdered his own daughter.
I didn't know if he'd buried her. I just took a gamble. The fact that we hadn't found her, this had been over a week. And the fact that she hadn't been found in that period of time would indicate to me that she probably was underground.
He was kind of told by Detective Madsen that, look, we know you killed her. We know you buried her somewhere. You probably didn't bury her deep enough. The animals are gonna find her. They're gonna dip her bones. We're gonna find it.
And then, yeah, look over your shoulder. I'll be looking for you because you'll never know when the time is that I'm gonna throw you in jail.
The satellites would be looking too. And it didn't take long for Jackson to take the bait. The GPS system revealed that Jackson had driven 60 miles away to a remote logging site and spent the next 44 minutes there. 4 days later, Jackson drove 5 minutes away from his home to another deserted location on Vicari Road.
He arrives at that site at 2:28:28, and the next movement is 2:44:10, which is approximately 15 minutes.
From there, the GPS tracking system reveals Jackson drove 60 miles away, stopping once again at the logging site.
There's some open fields, farmland, and a lot of woods.
When police went to the Vicari Road site, cadaver dogs went straight to a shallow grave, empty except for 2 plastic shopping bags and some duct tape, which had several red hairs attached. Next, police made the 60-mile drive to the logging site. Once there, the cadaver dogs found an area that had recently been excavated. It was a grave, deeper than the one on Vicari Road. And in that grave was the body of 9-year-old Valerie Jackson, lying face down. The police gamble had paid off. They had frightened Jackson into moving Valerie's body into a deeper grave.
I watched Sheriff Sturck as he walked towards me. He looked at me and he told me that they had found what they believed to be the body of Valerie. And I just crashed to the ground. I went down, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't feel my legs, my arms, nothing. I was gone. I was gone. I was mentally at that point in my life, I died. I died. It hurt so much.
Investigators now had an avalanche of forensic evidence. The plastic bags were the same brand as dozens found in Jackson's kitchen, and traces of Valerie's blood were found inside. The duct tape in the grave matched a roll in Jackson's basement. Jackson's tire and footwear impressions were found at the grave sites. All of this evidence tied Jackson to the burial. But police still needed proof that Jackson was the one who committed the murder. Police sent the plastic bags from the grave to the United States Secret Service for analysis. They were using an extraordinary technique called vacuum metal deposition, which can find the tiniest traces of a fingerprint on non-porous surfaces like plastic.
We're here to assist any law enforcement agency, state, local, or other federal agency. You have a case of a child abduction or a child homicide. Although we're extremely busy, this is the kind of case that goes to the front of the line.
The evidence is placed in a chamber, along with tiny specks of gold and zinc. The pressure in the chamber is reduced to a near-perfect vacuum. The metals are heated, vaporized, and within the vacuum of the chamber adhere to any finger oils which may be present. The analysis was successful. The Secret Service found fingerprints on the inside of the plastic bag and on the duct tape. The fingerprints were those of Brad Jackson. At Valerie Jackson's autopsy, the medical examiners found no evidence of sexual abuse, but discovered bruising around her face and nose, which solved the mystery of how she was murdered.
The pillow that was found in her room had 2 blood spots on it, which were consistent with a pillow being pressed over someone's face and the blood draining from the nose there.
The question of motive was one that still haunted prosecutors.
The key issue in all this was why, and convincing a jury that a parent could actually kill their own child.
In a fascinating turn of events, it was the Global Positioning Satellite System which revealed the elusive motive. Almost a year after Valerie Jackson disappeared, her father went on trial for murder. Led to Valerie's grave by a GPS tracking system, prosecutors were now able to piece together the events of Valerie's murder. Prosecutors believe that Jackson smothered Valerie with the pillow, leaving behind the bloodstains found by police. Then Jackson got the plastic bags and duct tape to cover her head and prevent blood from dripping onto the floor. Finally, Jackson dressed the little girl, which is how he remembered what Valerie was wearing, even the color of her socks. Jackson drove Valerie's body to the Vicari Road site just 5 minutes away, an area he knew from hunting. It's unclear whether he dug the grave then or sometime earlier. After he returned, he called police to report his daughter missing. A few weeks later, while under the surveillance of the GPS system, Jackson drove an hour away to a deserted logging site where he spent the next 44 minutes presumably digging a deeper grave. 4 days later, Jackson went to the Vicari Road gravesite, removed Valerie's body, and made the 1-hour journey back to the logging site where he placed her in a deeper grave. But why did Jackson kill his own daughter? Astonishingly, the Global Positioning System revealed the answer. Jackson repeatedly drove by the home of his former girlfriend, Danette Schroeder, as he went to and from the grave sites. Even though they had broken up, Brad continued to pursue her.
So he was really obsessed with this woman, and the obsession got to the degree that his relationship with her was more important in his daughter's life.
I firmly believe that it got to the point where he saw that Valerie wasn't going to come around to Danette. He wanted Danette, and Valerie became disposable.
The first thing Brad Jackson did after his arrest was to call Danette from his jail cell and propose marriage. The first thing she did was change the locks on her doors. Prosecutor Jack Driscoll took the case personally.
Here's a parent who is supposed to protect their child, who's supposed to be the guardian for them, and he ends up killing him. buries him face down in the dirt, like he doesn't even care. And, you know, that offended me to such a vast degree. I had to do this case. I mean, I had to.
Mr. Jackson, have you received a copy of the information charging you with 1 count of murder in the 1st degree? And Mr. Jackson, how do you plead to those 2 charges?
Not guilty.
At the trial, Jackson didn't deny digging the graves or burying Valerie. But Jackson claimed Valerie's death was an accident, that he found her dead of an overdose of Paxil. He feared that he would be blamed. He panicked and buried the body. But forensic scientists testified that the Paxil levels in Valerie's system were nowhere near lethal. Brad Jackson was found guilty of 1st-degree murder and was sentenced to 56 years in prison.
I believe he should have faced the death penalty, but he didn't. I think anyone that murders a child should face the death penalty, and their life should end.
I hope he never gets out of jail. And I wish he'd tell us where Roseanne is.
Many people believe Jackson also killed Valerie's mother, Roseanne Pleasant, years earlier, but police have no proof.
She was scared to death of Brad. In my last conversation with my sister, she said she feared for her life. She said that Brad had some lye around, and what is lye used for? At that time, Brad worked on cement and building foundations. And so, to this day, I believe that my sister's buried somewhere in one of those foundations he was working on.
The children of McDonald Elementary School planted a tree in Valerie's memory. It lives and grows there, healthy and strong, the way Valerie should have. This is the story of 2 crimes committed in different states, 500 miles apart. In each case, a woman was assaulted late at night. Investigators found the same signature elements in both crimes. The calling card of this perpetrator was so unusual, it eventually cost him his life. Perth Amboy, New Jersey, about an hour's drive from the hustle and bustle of New York City. For 300 years, this riverfront town has been a haven for immigrants seeking a better life in America. Melissa Padilla's parents came from Puerto Rico. She and her 4 brothers grew up here.
Yeah, she was my right hand. She was always helping me with them. She was like a second mother to them. They depend on her.
I remember her often helping me out with my work. She was an excellent speller, and my spelling is just something I've never been able to handle. And she was always there when I needed some help with that.
Melissa attended high school in Perth Amboy, but quit in her junior year and later became pregnant. She had 3 more children in rapid succession, and in 1994 was unmarried and supporting herself and the children with a monthly welfare check.
She didn't have any technical skills or something that would demand a high-paying job. So she would have to suit for minimum wage. And there was no way that she was going to make it with that.
Melissa was able to scrape by for a while, but then she fell behind on her rent and lost her apartment. Melissa and her children then moved into the Gem Motel, one of several cheap motels located along Route 1, a main north-south artery in Avenel, New Jersey. On the night of August 11, 1994, Melissa left the children with her boyfriend and walked to a nearby convenience store for some groceries.
She went out at 11 at night because her kids were hungry.
Melissa left the store around 11:30 and headed back to the motel, but she never arrived. Her boyfriend told police he found her half-naked body later that night along the highway. Melissa's mother got the word shortly after the body was discovered.
You're not supposed to bury your children. That you're gonna die before them. No parents want to bury their children. It's hard. I was supposed to go before her.
Most murderers go to great lengths to avoid detection. Melissa's killer didn't seem to care, committing his crime along a busy highway where he could have been easily seen. It was this brazenness that would eventually be his downfall. When Melissa Padilla left her hotel room to buy food for her young children, her route took her along a well-traveled highway to a nearby convenience store. Melissa never returned. Her boyfriend told police he found her body in a sewer pipe near the highway. She was naked from the waist down.
The autopsy revealed that she died as a result of the manual asphyxiation and assault.
There were several grocery items near the body, as well as Melissa's blood-spattered shorts found about half a block away, with the pocket turned out. But the most telling evidence came from Melissa's body itself.
Her eyes were battered, indicating that she had received punches from someone who was strong and who subdued her in that way. The fact that she was naked and that her genital area was mutilated obviously indicated that there was a sexual assault.
Scrapings from under her fingernails revealed DNA that authorities hoped would bring a conviction if they could only find a suspect. Melissa's autopsy revealed one other detail, something Tom Capsack had never seen in his 31 years of prosecuting homicides.
She had bite marks on her chin and on her left breast, indicating that there was probably some kind of ritualistic element to the killing.
The bite mark on the chin was particularly unusual.
I've done a lot of research and I've talked to a lot of people. Bite marks usually occur to the genital areas, to the breast, to the stomach, but I have never heard of one that occurred to the chin before.
Armed with this evidence, New Jersey police began their search for Melissa's killer. The security video from the Quick Check store where Melissa had bought groceries helped establish the time of the murder, shortly before midnight. It also showed the cashier giving her change. But no money was found in Melissa's clothing, indicating she had also been robbed. Police also began canvassing the area, looking for eyewitnesses.
There was a witness that was identified, that was interviewed, who indicated they were traveling past the roadway and saw what appeared to be 2 individuals in some sort of struggle, standing up near the concrete pipes.
But the witness could provide little useful information. The battering about Melissa's face and the bite marks on her breast and chin led police to theorize that her killer got a perverse pleasure out of assaulting women and might have struck before. Just a mile from the murder scene was a prison for convicted sex offenders. A check of prison records showed a number of released prisoners living in the area.
We then pulled their files to determine what their MO was and whether they were involved in any kind of ritual when they committed their sex crimes.
They complied with requests for DNA samples. They complied with exemplar requests for hairs. They also submitted to polygraph examinations that were conducted by the Woodbridge Police Department, and they all were eliminated as suspects in the crime.
Melissa's boyfriend, who had stayed with her children, was also eliminated.
Eventually, things started to appear that we have an unsolved homicide with no suspect to pursue.
8 months later, 500 miles away in Maine, there was another assault, strikingly similar to Melissa Padilla's.
Excuse me, sir. Are you okay?
This crime was bold and brazen, but the perpetrator made a mistake in choosing his victim. She was a state trooper. Months after the murder of Melissa Padilla, police still didn't have a suspect. The brutality of the assault led police to believe her killer took pleasure in attacking women and might strike again. 8 months later, state troopers in Maine reported a brazen assault on one of their own. The assault took place on April 3rd, 1995 at about 8:30 p.m. Trooper Vicki Gardner, an 11-year veteran, was off duty and driving her police cruiser south on Interstate 95.
She came across a vehicle facing the wrong way on the interstate, and she stopped to investigate.
Excuse me, sir. Are you okay?
Gardner discovered that the driver, Stephen Fortin, had been drinking.
Would you please get out of the car?
Since she was off duty, she called for another police vehicle to take Fortin into custody.
Could you send some backup?
When Fortin heard this, he exploded.
Fortin sucker punched her, ripped her clothes off, molested her. In the process of molesting her, he bit her. When the backup cruiser arrived, he took off in the cruiser.
Vicki Gardner was unconscious, still in the vehicle. When she regained consciousness, she opened the passenger door and tried to jump out.
He was sort of trying to reach out and grab a hold of her and pull her back in, and she swung herself away from him and got away from him.
Vicki Gardner was lucky to be alive.
I've never seen a woman attacked that way, damaged that badly, who lived to talk about it.
After Vicki jumped out of the vehicle, Fortin lost control of the car and crashed. He was later apprehended. Lieutenant Lancaster interviewed him in prison.
He took no responsibility. It was while we spoke, though we spoke of the incident, it was always somebody else's fault. I knew that I was dealing with someone that was evil.
Vicki had scrapes and bruises over her entire body, and her face was severely battered. Fortin had not only punched and assaulted her, he had also left a bizarre calling card. 2 bite marks, one on the outer area of her left breast, the other on her chin.
Who attacks a trooper and sexually molests her in her own cruiser? You just know from the facts of this case and the assault and the way in which the assault took place and every aspect about it, you knew that you were dealing with someone who had done something like this before.
In fact, a check of police records in Fortin's home state of New Jersey revealed that he had a history of violence. Fortin's name was well known to Prosecutor Capsack. He had sent him to prison for 7 years on a manslaughter charge. Fortin got out after only 2.5 years.
He had stabbed his brother in the throat in 1983 in the township of Carteret and was pled guilty to that.
When the New Jersey State Police heard the news of Steve Fortin's assault in Maine, they naturally wanted to find out if Fortin was in New Jersey on the night Melissa Padilla was killed. An interview with Fortin's former girlfriend provided the answer.
And she told us that in August of 1994, Stephen Fortin did in fact live in Avenel, New Jersey. In fact, he lived in an apartment with her. And on the very night in question, he assaulted her in the parking lot of a restaurant, and she called the police, and he ran.
That restaurant, Bud's Hut, was a short walk from the Gem Motel where Melissa was living. The police report listed the time of the assault on Dawn Archer as 10:30 p.m., an hour before Melissa was murdered. At last, authorities had a suspect. Melissa's brother got the word a day after his birthday.
I didn't consider it a birthday gift, but I was glad that they did find him. And I was praying that they would find him before he could ever do that to someone else.
They found him, but now they had to prove him guilty. Prosecutors hoped the DNA evidence taken from under Melissa's fingernails would incriminate Fortin, but it didn't.
When it was compared to Stephen Fortin from Maine's evidence that we obtained from them, the DNA lab could not include him or exclude him as a source.
With the DNA results inconclusive, the bite marks on the 2 victims seemed to be prosecutors' best chance of linking Fortin to Melissa Padilla's murder. A plaster impression was therefore made on Fortin's teeth. The impression, along with photographs of the bite marks, were sent to Dr. Lo Levine, a respected forensic odontologist who worked for the New York State Police.
These are Mr. Fortin's teeth. They're actually models of them. And they're made the same way as the orthodontist would take models or the dentist takes models to do prosthetic devices. If you take a look at the upper teeth, he's got a space between his 2 middle front ones. And the one on the right is bigger than the one on the left because it's a cap, and in fact the biting surface is slightly wider also from front to back. If you look at the models of lower teeth, they're very, very straight across the bottom of them. He's got almost no wear on the incisal edges, so they leave linear markings rather than rectangles, and they're very, very straight across. He's got the slightly pointed canines, so he doesn't have a whole lot of wear.
Levine compared Fortin's teeth to the bite marks on Vicki Gardner and Melissa Padilla. He found them to be a match. Leaving nothing to chance, prosecutors also brought in Roy Hazelwood, a former FBI profiler and an expert on criminal behavior.
He was interested in my studying the crimes to determine whether or not I could do a linkage analysis in the 2 crimes. A linkage analysis is an in-depth study of 2 or more crimes with the idea of attempting to determine whether or not they were committed by the same person.
Hazelwood concluded that the same man had indeed committed both crimes. The trial of Stephen Fortin began on October 31st, 2000. A trial with no eyewitnesses, circumstantial evidence, and inconclusive DNA findings. The prosecutor's case rested almost entirely on the opinions of two forensic experts. The murder of Melissa Padilla and the assault of a Maine state trooper were so strikingly similar that this became a critical part of the prosecution's case. At Stephen Fortin's trial, Maine State Trooper Vicki Gardner took the stand to describe how Fortin had beaten and sexually assaulted her.
Then we had to bring in witnesses that brought the two crimes together, and they were Hazelwood and Levine.
Addressing the jury, Roy Hazelwood explained that some crimes, like the murder of Melissa Padilla and the assault of Trooper Gardner, have unique patterns of behavior which he called rituals.
The ritual are those acts which are unnecessary to the commission of the crime and are carried out to meet the emotional needs of the offender.
In this case, the need for psychosexual gratification. Hazelwood identified 5 examples of ritualistic behavior that were common to both cases.
Bite mark to the chin, bite mark to the left breast, excessive battering to the upper portion of the face in both instances, injurious anal penetration, and manual strangulation from the front. I've never seen that combination of behaviors in any other crime.
Then Dr. Levine explained to the jury that no two people have teeth patterns that are exactly the same.
What I basically did was to show the jurors that people leave bite marks that look different. We used 2 of the prosecutors, myself, and one of the investigators, so that bite marks look different.
Dr. Levine showed the jury overlays of Steve Fortin's teeth.
We were able to show the jury how the overlays fit over the life-size photographs of the bite mark on the victim. We did it by animating the overlay so that it moves across the screen and stops exactly on the bite mark. And it was very effective, and it was very dramatic, and I think it worked very well.
New Jersey authorities are coming for...
The jury deliberated Stephen Fortin's fate for 2 days before reaching their verdict. Guilty. In the penalty phase, prosecutors asked for the death sentence and concluded by explaining to the jury why Fortin had bitten his victims on the chin.
What we finally decided regarding the bite mark to the chin was that Stephen Fortin was biting the victim on the chin while he was looking in her eyes and mutilating her genitals, and that he was getting a perverse pleasure out of that.
On February 26, 2001, Fortin was sentenced to die by lethal injection.
It was justice, but I didn't feel like a vengeance, that justice should have been served, you know. I was grateful.
Roy Hazelwood and Lowell Levine were absolutely critical to the case. This case, like most murder cases, depended on circumstantial evidence, on forensic evidence, on expert testimony.
And the tools those experts have to draw on, says Hazelwood, are growing more and more sophisticated every year.
I'm continuously amazed at the strides we've made in investigating crimes and solving crimes and prosecuting crimes.
Stephen Fortin is now in Trenton State Prison, awaiting execution. Melissa Padilla's sons are living with their father. Her daughters are being raised by Melissa's mom.
She was a good mother, good sister, good friend. She was a wonderful daughter.
She was a good person. Had a big heart. And I'm I'm sorry her kids won't be able to know that.
In 1989, near the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, 19-year-old Lori Auker left for work. She was never heard from again.
Liftoff of the 20...
It was NASA technology, a fly, and the family cat that helped solve her disappearance in a most unusual way. The Susquehanna Valley in central Pennsylvania is a quiet agricultural area. Lori Auker grew up here, not far from the mighty Susquehanna River.
Lori was a very sweet girl. She was a typical 19-year-old. She had a lot of goals and aspirations for her future as far as becoming a veterinarian and had a great deal of interest in animals.
Just out of high school, Lori married Robert Auker. He was almost 10 years older and worked in a warehouse. Not long afterwards, the couple had a son, Matthew. Lori took a job at a local pet store to earn extra money. She shared her love of animals with her son, Matthew, at every opportunity.
When she wasn't working, she'd come in to show him, he particularly liked kittens, and she'd bring him in to show him the kittens, and he liked watching the fish, playing with the puppies. But she was a good mother.
Although Lori and Robert loved their child, problems between the two began to surface. The couple argued, and friends say they were unable to resolve their differences. Just 18 months after they were married, Lori and Robert separated. Lori and the baby moved in with her parents. Robert moved in with his and had visitation rights.
She wasn't happy with him because he had a very controlling type nature about him. She had to answer all his questions before she could go anywhere. He used physical discipline whenever he got upset with Matt, and that's what upset Lori.
While separated, Lori dated occasionally, but only casually. On May 24th, 1989, while Matthew was at Robert's house, Lori prepared for her usual 4 to 9 shift at the pet store. After packing a snack, Lori left for work, but she never arrived. Lori's supervisor called looking for her.
And I asked them if Lori had left for work, and her father said that she had. And I said, well, has she called or anything? Because she's not here at the store yet, and she was scheduled to start about a half an hour ago. He said, no. He said, but this makes me very worried. He said, she left on time.
Lori's father drove the route that she usually took to work. He thought she might have had car trouble along the way. He eventually found Lori's car in the parking lot near the pet shop where she usually parked. Nothing seemed to be out of place. Lori's purse and keys were not in the car.
The disappearance frightened people. The thought that some young woman could go to a mall, a very busy mall, in broad daylight and suddenly disappear, presumably being abducted, really shot a shockwave of fear throughout that rather conservative, small area.
Police canvassed the area and questioned employees and shoppers in the mall, but no one saw anything suspicious. Almost from the start, police suspected Laurie's estranged husband, Robert, may have had something to do with her disappearance. But Robert said he hadn't seen Laurie at all that day, and he had an alibi. He said he was babysitting their son, went shopping, and then went to 2 scheduled appointments.
Mr. Alker told me that on the day of Lori Ann's disappearance that he had been over to Wise Markets to get a disability claim form. And he took that form to an office in Lewisburg, an orthopedic surgeon. And from there he went to the Bloomsburg Sears Mall and priced a dishwasher for his mother.
Police are now asking for the public's help.
For the next 3 weeks, police, family members, friends, and volunteers continued the search with no success. On June 12th, a woman jogging a few miles from the mall spotted something in an area known as Clody's Dump. It was little more than a skeleton. Investigators wondered whether this was the body of Laurie Alker and looked to forensic science for some way to tell.
The body was markedly decomposed in that only in the extremities was there any flesh left. There was no skin and no organs internally to work with.
Investigators needed to identify the skeleton found in the dump a few miles from the pet store. And they also wanted to know the cause of death. To find out, they brought in forensic pathologist Dr. Isidore Mahalikas. From the size of the skull, he knew the body was female. The cut marks on the bones and the holes in the clothing helped him to determine the cause of death.
The presence of cuts, which corresponded to perforations in the sweater, is consistent with stab wounds, with movement, and with homicide.
Dr. Mahalikas concluded that this woman had been stabbed in the chest and back at least 7 times, possibly as many as 11. But he wasn't able to make an identification from the remains. For that, Dr. Mahalikas asked forensic odontologist Dr. Dennis Asen to make a dental comparison.
Without the benefit of forensic dentistry, when you have a victim such as Laurie Alker's, in the Laurie Alker case, there are no fingerprints that you can use. The body is unrecognizable because of the disintegration of tissues. Very often, the only thing that does remain is the dental evidence that we can compare to before death records and establish a positive identification.
After comparing the teeth of the victim to Laurie's dental records and x-rays, Dr. Asen made a positive identification.
The victim had 9 teeth restored with dental materials. Those teeth, as it turned out, were the same teeth that Laurie Alker had restored. The same 9 teeth, the same type of material in each tooth, the same location of materials or restorations in each tooth that matched up with Laurie Alker.
No murder weapon was found at the scene. Investigators now wanted to know when Laurie died. Time of death is usually determined in one of 3 ways. First, by the body temperature, useless in this case given the length of time the body was outside. Another way is to examine stomach contents, but the body was too badly decomposed. The third way is to analyze any insect activity. Forensic entomologist Dr. K. Chung Kim studied the larvae found on the body. An entomologist is an expert in the study of insects.
What this body had was a large number of different kinds of beetles, and then a very late stage of maggots.
Within minutes of death, blowflies can detect the smell of decomposition even from miles away. Dr. Kim calculated that the larvae deposited by the flies had been on the body for 19 days, which meant they were on the body the day Laurie disappeared. In an incredible stroke of luck, police learned that an automated teller machine near the entrance to the mall was equipped with a surveillance camera, which took pictures every 10 seconds. The camera was aimed in the direction of Laurie's car. At first glance, the images looked unimportant. They showed a man making a bank transaction. But in the background, out of focus, there appeared to be an automobile near Laurie's car with an unidentified person standing nearby.
Deeper into the parking lot was a scene that was captured on this video. The scene was a little blurry. I would liken it to like an Alfred Hitchcock kind of movie.
The images looked promising, but were not clear enough for any kind of analysis. So prosecutors asked both the Pennsylvania State Police Laboratory and the FBI for help, but neither one could improve the photographs. With nowhere else to turn, the FBI suggested they ask NASA for help. NASA had been using sophisticated digital photo enhancement technology to improve images from space. NASA referred the case to research scientist Alan Tejan of the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization.
Challenger, go and throttle up.
Tejan used a technique similar to the one used to determine the cause of the Challenger explosion in 1986.
Digitization is the process of taking the normal video signal that you would get out of your VCR at home and turning it into a computer image file.
When the images are put into the computer, they are broken down into thousands of pixels.
Each of these pixels are converted into a number representing how bright that dot is. In this particular case, the data is black and white video, so that the pixel represents simply different shades between total black and full white.
Digital enhancement can also remove blurring in an image, and special filters can eliminate some of the grain. Once complete, you can see how this process significantly improved the images. Prosecutors hoped that these enhanced photographs would tell the story of Laurie Auker's disappearance. The digitally enhanced surveillance photos of the parking lot where Laurie Auker disappeared showed Laurie's car in its parking spot. Standing behind it was a person in the same clothing Laurie wore that day.
The film was in black and white. On that particular scene, we knew that Laurie had been wearing a windbreaker that day, had been wearing jeans, and had carried a white purse. She was of medium build. She had short brown hair. That person that we see in the picture there fits that description precisely.
The next picture, taken 10 seconds later, shows another automobile diagonally in front of Laurie with the passenger's side door open. You can see that Laurie is bent over, looking into the car. The final picture shows Laurie's car still in its parking spot, but Laurie is gone. The car Laurie was standing next to is leaving the parking lot.
The person we've described as Laurie Auker cannot be seen, and we know circumstantially that she never made it into the door. So that, we believe, was the depiction of her abduction.
An automobile expert identified the getaway car as a Chevrolet Celebrity. Although Laurie's estranged husband, Robert, didn't own a Chevrolet Celebrity, his parents did. Robert's parents told police that Robert had borrowed their car on the day Laurie disappeared. They said they sold the car a week after Robert returned it. Police tracked it through 3 different car dealerships.
It transferred hands within the used car industry a few times, and it was ultimately purchased. The first consumer that purchased it was a retired state police officer.
The police officer bought the vehicle for his stepdaughter, who hadn't yet reached driving age. So it had been sitting in a garage, a lucky break for investigators.
It still maintained its integrity. By the time we got to it, we were able to access the vehicle, test it scientifically for prints or trace evidence.
Investigators searched the car, but could find no traces of blood anywhere inside.
Well, we did have some neighbors observe Robert Ocker scrupulously cleaning that car the day after Lori disappeared.
But in the trunk of the car, they found a clue. A tiny strand of hair. Under a microscope, the hair did not appear to be human. On the left is a human hair. On the right, the hair from Robert's trunk. Under an electron microscope, magnified thousands of times, the outer pattern of the hair was more box-like than human hair, similar to the steps on a ladder. The blue specks are dust particles. After looking through numerous species of hair, scientists discovered it was a cat hair. Investigators compared that hair to a cat hair from Lori's parents' cat and found they were microscopically similar. This was significant since the cat belonged to Lori's parents. Robert didn't have access to this cat, and the cat never resided with Robert and Lori when they lived together. What was also significant, Robert's parents didn't own a cat, and Lori had never been in Robert's parents' car before her disappearance. Investigators believed that this cat hair was proof that Lori had been in the trunk of Robert's car.
Robert Ocker knew his parents were going to be trading that vehicle in within a matter of days. And in my opinion, that's why he used that vehicle and not his own to abduct Lori.
With this evidence in hand, police arrested Robert Ocker for the murder of his estranged wife.
When I arrested Robert Ocker, he said to me, "You've got to be kidding."
What the worst part of it, to me, other than the fact that she died, was when we were told that he had thrown her body in a dump. There's no reason for someone like Lori to wind up in a dump.
Prosecutors believe the surveillance photographs supported their theory that Robert abducted Lori in the mall parking lot. To convince a jury, prosecutors needed to prove that the automobile in the pictures was the Chevrolet owned by Robert Ocker's parents. So they reconstructed the crime. They placed the Chevrolet Robert was driving in the mall parking lot and took photographs from the same position, height, and at the same millimeter as the surveillance camera. But this time, the background was in focus. At the top is the original surveillance picture of Lori's alleged abduction. At the bottom is the recreation photograph. The vehicles in both pictures look identical. And prosecutors discovered a possible motive for the murder: money.
Ocker had taken out an insurance policy on Lori and on his son, listing himself as the beneficiary. He had taken that policy out after they separated.
And Robert and Lori had been engaged in a custody dispute over their son, another possible motive. A background check of Robert Ocker revealed that he had a troubled past.
Robert Ocker had been in trouble most of his life, as a juvenile up to his adulthood.
Shortly after he married Lori, Robert was convicted for driving under the influence of alcohol and served a brief stint in prison. While there, Robert ordered a book that described in detail how to commit a murder and get away with it. The title of the book will not be revealed in this program for obvious reasons. Police officials blocked the delivery of this order. Prosecutors believe that on May 24, 1989, as Laurie drove into the mall parking lot, Robert was there, waiting.
What are you doing here?
Laurie, I need you to come with me right away.
What's wrong with him?
When Robert drove up and opened the door, he may have used some type of excuse to get Laurie inside, possibly that their son was sick and he needed her help. Prosecutors admit they don't know where the murder took place. The forensic evidence doesn't say. All they know is that Laurie was in Robert's trunk sometime that day and was stabbed numerous times in the chest and back before her body was left at the dump. When Robert later cleaned the trunk, he couldn't see the almost microscopic evidence that Laurie left behind. The cat hair, which had stuck to Laurie's clothing, was transferred again onto the carpet of Robert's trunk. It was an ironic twist, given Laurie's lifelong love of animals.
I remember Laurie as being a very nice person. Just all around nice. She was nice to animals, she was nice to people, and she loved her son, absolutely loved her son.
Robert Auker was found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping and was sentenced to death. On appeal, the sentence was reduced to life in prison without parole. NASA's help was an important forensic breakthrough, since it was one of the first times a crime scene photo had undergone digital video enhancement.
The enhancement of the video from the ATM machine was something brand new, something that had never been done before. This is a case that set a trend for prosecutors, certainly throughout Pennsylvania. I think there was an awakening, a scientific awakening on the part of police, on the part of prosecutors. They realized suddenly that there were other tools at their disposal that perhaps they hadn't considered before. And ironically, those tools have now become somewhat routine.
This is the story of a classic love triangle: husband, wife, and lover. One of these three died in what was described as an accident. A forensic computer analysis uncovered photographs and emails so revealing they even embarrassed a local judge. Detroit, Michigan, nicknamed the Motor City for its history as one of the world's largest automotive manufacturing hubs. Just west of Detroit is Michigan State University with almost 40,000 students. In 1990, Michael Mick Fletcher was an undergraduate student there with hopes of one day becoming a lawyer. At a campus social event, Mick Fletcher met Leanne Meisner, who wasn't a student but worked as a telemarketer nearby. For both, it was love at first sight, and they were inseparable. 3 years later, in September of 1993, Mick and Leanne married.
That was great. He was going to be a lawyer,
So he'd make a lot of money, be able to buy her a nice house, and she wanted to stay home and have a lot of babies.
That's all she wanted in life. That's all, since she was a little girl, all she wanted to do was to get married and have children.
The newlyweds settled in Hazel Park, a working-class suburb just north of Detroit. They bought this house on Hazelwood Avenue, and Mick started law school. Leanne worked to support them, and not long afterwards, the couple had a daughter, Hannah.
That was her joy. She was just crazy about Hannah.
The Fletcher household appeared to be a happy one.
I mean, she just got a thrill out of everything that Hannah did. Oh my gosh, she dressed her so cute too. All her cute little outfits. It was like her little doll.
By 1999, Mick was an up-and-coming criminal defense attorney, working hard to build his practice. On August 12, 1999, the couple had more good news. Leanne learned she was pregnant with their second child. Mick was delighted with the news and sent her a note.
Leanne, I might not always tell you, but you mean the world to me. I love you so much, sweetheart. And girl or boy, so long as they are part of you, our children will all be beautiful. I love you, Mick.
That Sunday night, the couple celebrated their good fortune with Leanne's parents. Mick asked his in-laws if they would watch their granddaughter, Hannah, the next day.
And he said, well, I wonder if you'd babysit for about 1 hour. And I said, for 1 hour? And he said, yeah. He said, we want to go to the firing range.
Mick believed in having a gun in the house for protection, and he wanted Leanne to learn how to use it. After visiting the firing range, Mick and Leanne decided to return home and to spend some quiet time together before picking up their daughter. Just a few minutes after they arrived home, Mick made a frantic call to police.
Sorry, I can't understand. Can you calm down, please?
Hazel Park police found Leanne dead on the bedroom floor, naked from the waist down, a bullet hole through her right ear. Mick told police he and Leanne were sitting on the bed together, reloading the .45 caliber Smith & Wesson they just used at the firing range.
He had trouble loading the second clip, so he gave it to Leanne to help him. He put the gun down in the gun box at the foot of the bed, got up, went to the bathroom to wash his hands, and that's when he heard the gun go off. He came running out of the bathroom and saw his wife laying on the floor.
Oh, God. Leanne! Leanne! The last thing I ever wanted in my life was to bury one of my kids. And then to have to bury one so young, so beautiful. Not fair.
At first glance, it appeared to be an accident, but police decided to take a second look, and then a third. As part of the investigation into Leanne Fletcher's death, police first needed to eliminate the possibility of suicide. Perhaps Leanne's pregnancy had caused some depression.
She was so excited. There's no way on earth that Leanne would ever consider suicide, let alone go through with it. Not in a million years.
Mick Fletcher told police his wife accidentally shot herself in their bedroom shortly after a trip to the firing range as she tried to reload their pistol. Leanne's mother suspected that an accidental shooting in the head was a little too convenient.
This was a terrible accident. She would have been shot in her hand, her arm, her foot, in the wall. I said it wouldn't be in her head.
In the couple's bedroom, police noticed blood stains on the carpet under Leanne's body, as well as under the gun and clip. And there was blood spatter on the computer stand by the bed. There was more blood spatter on the edge of the bedspread. The medical examiner, Dr. Lubisa Dragovic, performed Leanne's autopsy. There was no gunpowder residue in the bullet wound, but there were some tiny dots of gunpowder called stippling embedded in the skin around the wound.
Gunpowder stippling is a phenomenon that occurs when partly burnt or unburnt gunpowder particles land on the surface of the skin.
The density of this stippling pattern indicated that the muzzle of the firearm was 12 to 18 inches away from Leanne's head when the gun went off. And the trajectory of the bullet was almost horizontal, an unusual path for a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head.
In order to accomplish that, your arm has to be about 4 foot long. This lady had only 23 inches or 23 and a half inches long right arm.
When police searched the couple's home, they found a brown folder in Mick's office containing numerous romantic greeting cards. Inside were pictures of Susan Chernowski, a local district court judge. Investigators also discovered that Mick had earned $17,000 in legal fees from cases assigned by and presided over by Judge Susan Chernowski. If the two were romantically involved, this was a gross violation of legal ethics. Investigators seized the Fletcher's home computer and Susan Chernowski's office computer for examination by a forensic computer expert.
For years and years, we've always been willing to look in a file cabinet for some type of an incriminating document. Well, people aren't using file cabinets anymore, they're using computers.
Sergeant Duke copied the hard drives from the confiscated computers onto a forensic examination computer, which is equipped with special software that can access password-protected files and reconstruct documents which have been deleted. Sergeant Duke found nude photographs of Judge Chernowski and hundreds of emails between her and Mick.
They read as love letters. They appeared to be intimate, they appeared to be lovers, they talked about being together, they talked about wanting to be together in the future.
Mick had been corresponding with the judge for 17 months. Police also learned that before she died, Leanne had suspected her husband was having an affair, and the couple separated. But 3 months later, they reconciled and moved back in together. Police no longer believed that Leanne's death was an accident and were beginning to suspect that Mick Fletcher and the judge might be involved. When investigators discovered that attorney Mick Fletcher was having an affair with a sitting judge at the time of his wife's death, both were considered suspects.
He had his, should I call her, his whore? Because that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's what she is.
Judge Susan Chernowski denied she had anything to do with Leanne's death, but she was able to provide some useful information.
So I asked the judge, when was the last time they had sexual relations? And she stated the night before the homicide.
This meant that after having dinner with Leanne's parents, Mick dropped his wife and daughter off at home and made some excuse so that he could secretly meet with his lover.
She believed there was no sexual relationship between himself and Leanne. And she told us that if there was a sexual relationship between Michael and Leanne, that their relationship would be over.
And all of a sudden now, at the time of her death, she was 3 weeks, 4 weeks pregnant, that we believe that that was indeed the motive for her death.
Mick insisted that Leanne's death was an accident. He claimed Leanne was reloading their gun and that he heard the gunshot when he was in the bathroom. But the evidence told a different story. The gun and extra clip were found on the floor and not in Leanne's hand.
In a lot of cases where people shoot themselves, the gun is still in their hand because of anatomy that I can't explain. The body grabs the gun.
There was also blood on Leanne's palm. If the gun had been in her hand when the shot was fired, the gun would have prevented the blood from striking the palm of her hand. And there was blood on the carpet underneath the gun and extra clip.
Well, it should have been on top of those items. There's blood underneath the items. If she had shot herself, the blood would have fallen on top of the gun and on top of the clip.
And by the dresser, there was a shell casing standing on end.
And everything looked like it was placed.
We swabbed Leanne's hands and sent it to a lab to determine whether or not there was any type of gunpowder residue that may have been left. That came back negative.
Forensic serologist and blood spatter expert Dave Woodford examined the shirt Mick Fletcher wore the day of the shooting. A phenolphthalein chemical test found blood on the right cuff. Using a stereo microscope, Woodford saw high-velocity impact blood spatter on the right cuff. A fine mist of tiny blood particles had been driven deep into the fibers.
To me, it was critical because it pretty much took his story and didn't give it any credibility at all. There was no way that he could have been in the bathroom at the time of the shooting.
High-velocity impact blood spatter is created when a gunshot wound hits an area with blood and a fine mist of blood blows back toward the gun.
He had to be in close proximity to Leanne when she was shot.
Had Leanne shot herself, investigators say, there would have been high-velocity impact blood spatter on her hand, and there was none.
It doesn't make any difference if there are additional drops of blood that occur later or contaminate on top of it, some smudging occurs. There will still be areas that allow for this pattern to be recognized, and that was not there.
To find out where Leanne was when she was shot, investigators analyzed the angle of the blood spatter on the computer stand next to Leanne's body. The size and shape of the blood spatter told investigators that the blood hit the computer stand at a 10 to 20 degree angle. Strings, which were connected to each drop of blood spatter, revealed the exact location of Leanne's head when the shot was fired.
Say, for instance, the angle you got was 52 degrees, so then you take the string from the blood droplet and you measure up 52 degrees and you bring that out into space somewhere. And you do that with each blood droplet.
Where the strings intersect is the spot where the blood originated. Woodford concluded that Leanne was on the floor when she was shot.
She was not sitting on the bed while she was shot, that she was on her hands and her knees while she was shot.
Investigators also discovered fresh sperm in the vaginal swab from Leanne's autopsy, an indication that the couple had sexual relations shortly before the shooting.
It's my opinion that sexual relationships occurred pretty close to the time of her death.
Police repeatedly test-fired the gun in order to recreate the same stippling patterns found on Leanne's head. They fired at close range and gradually moved back at 6-inch intervals. The tests confirmed Dr. Dragovic's earlier observation. The gun was 12 to 18 inches away from Leanne's head when the shot was fired, too far away for Leanne to have held the gun herself.
Which in essence takes out the possibility of this this wound being self-inflicted.
Leanne's family never believed Mick's story that the shooting was accidental. Judge Chernowski said she was out of town on the day of Leanne's death, which checked out, and investigators did not believe she knew about Mick's plans. Police arrested Mick Fletcher and charged him with the premeditated murder of his wife. Prosecutors believe that the murder of Leanne Fletcher was premeditated and that her husband Mick killed her in order to protect his romantic relationship with Judge Susan Chernowski. Judge Chernowski testified that Mick had lied to her about his relationship with Leanne. Mick told her he no longer was having sexual relations with his wife, and so Susan Chernowski believed that the two had a future together. But when Leanne became pregnant, Mick realized that the judge would discover he had been lying.
I really do think if she wouldn't have gotten pregnant, she'd still be alive. I think that panicked him when she got pregnant, you know.
Prosecutors believe the couple's trip to the firing range was probably a setup, a way to explain why the pistol was out of its case in the bedroom.
They had to pick up their daughter, but before they picked up their daughter, they wanted to come home and have what he quoted as a quickie.
When they returned from the firing range and Leanne went into the bathroom, Mick placed the gun near the gun case at the foot of their bed. The medical evidence shows that the couple had sex on the floor.
We have to go pick up Hannah now.
As Leanne was getting up, Mick grabbed the gun and pulled the trigger. The mistakes Mick made were numerous. Blowback blood spatter landed on the cuff of Mick's shirt. And he placed the weapon and clip on top of a blood stain next to Leanne's bloody hand, which clearly showed she hadn't been holding the gun. Mick then went into the bathroom and rinsed off Leanne's blood that was later found in the sink trap. Then he called police.
You have the evidence of the night before where he is professing his love to another woman, not his wife. You had the blood in the trap of the sink, which would indicate that he washed his hands prior to making a 911 call. You have the high-velocity blood mist on the cuff of his shirt. You have the stippling patterns that are on the right side of Leanne's face. So it's a combination of all this evidence that just pointed towards him as the person that committed this crime.
Mick didn't want to be with Leanne anymore, but the thought of her being with somebody else, he just couldn't handle it.
Guilty of the lesser offense of second-degree murder.
But the jury did not believe Mick Fletcher planned Leanne's murder, so he was convicted of second-degree murder.
We were grateful that it was second degree, but it should have been first degree. It should have, I mean, it was clearly premeditated, and anybody that knew him knew that.
The trial judge sentenced Fletcher to the maximum penalty allowed, life in prison. In this exclusive phone interview from prison, Mick Fletcher tells the producers of this program that he is not a murderer.
I didn't kill my wife. I'm an innocent man. I had an affair. I did something that I shouldn't have done. I did something that was immoral. All I can tell you is that I didn't kill my wife.
Unfortunately for him, all the evidence points the other direction and points to the fact that indeed he did commit this murder and he did commit this crime.
It's hard when you have two people in the house and only one left to tell the story. And so you have to have the forensic evidence, and that basically will tell the story for you. And I'm so glad.
You have to look at the scene, and what does the scene tell you forensically? And that's exactly what happened in this case. that the story by the defendant that, oh my God, my wife accidentally shot herself, was seen through.
I hope they find him in the same humiliating way that he left my daughter, half naked, in the prison somewhere, dead.
And I hope he rots in hell.
In 1980, 4-year-old Vicki Lyons was found in a parking lot, unconscious and near death. There were no witnesses. No one knew what really happened. But Vicki's mother was determined to find out. West Texas is far removed from big cities like Dallas and Houston. The land is flat and dry, dotted with the occasional oil well or cotton field. At the crossroads of Interstate 20 and Route 87 is a little town called Big Spring. Out here, when the local high school marching band is invited to the state tournament, it's front page news. That front page belongs to the Big Spring Herald newspaper, which chronicles all the town's activities, no matter how big or small.
I worked in circulation department, and it was very nice. I knew all the people there. I'd known them for a long time.
In 1980, Crystal Lyons was living in Big Spring with her husband Bill and 4-year-old daughter Vicki.
A very quiet baby. She didn't like getting her hands dirty or her feet dirty. If you took her shoes off, she would walk and take one step, dust off her foot, dust off her hands, and take another step. She was very, very into being clean.
Like all working mothers, Crystal was often pulled in two directions. One day, when the babysitter didn't show up, Crystal's supervisor gave her a tough choice.
I told my boss that I didn't have anyone to take care of Vicki that day, and he told me that if I didn't bother to come in, I didn't have a job.
Since Crystal had taken Vicki into work before, she decided to do it again.
Hi, Vicki. How are you today?
Her co-workers liked the little girl, and Crystal kept her eye on Vicki as best she could. While Crystal was moving papers to the loading dock for afternoon delivery, Reverend J.B. Hardiman drove up.
I go up there every day. When I was in town, I'd go there every day and pick me up the paper early. I'd be there when they started running them.
As the delivery vehicles were preparing to leave the loading dock, Crystal heard her supervisor tell Vicki to go outside and play in the parking lot.
And I was just fixing to tell him, you know, I don't feel comfortable about any of this, so I'm just going to go home, and you can make your decision.
But before she could say anything, the supervisor saw Vicki lying on the ground, not moving.
She could tell from even the distance that, you know, she had been hit.
When Crystal got there, Vicki was unconscious and not breathing. No one else was there, and there was no indication what happened. Vicky was rushed by ambulance to the Odessa hospital about an hour away. Crystal followed in her car. As if Crystal and Vicky hadn't already been through enough, the ambulance broke down along the way.
We almost hit it. We were right behind the ambulance, and we almost hit the ambulance because it just slowed down and to such a point that we had to get out of the way.
Eventually, the ambulance got to the hospital and Vicky was rushed to intensive care.
That's when it really hit me that her condition was pretty severe, that she may not make it. She was mine and Bill's only child. It was hard. They finally took me and Bill in to see Vicky. She was in a coma. And then she started what they thought throwing up blood. And so they asked us to leave. We hadn't even been in there maybe 2 minutes.
As they left the room, they noticed unusual marks on Vicky's face.
So those are tire marks on her face, and he said, yes, they are.
Crystal had the presence of mind to get her camera and take pictures of these marks on Vicky's face before they disappeared. Had she not taken this important step, the story that follows might never have happened. While Vicky lay in a coma with her mother by her side, police questioned everyone at the newspaper, but no one had seen the incident. Police issued an all-points bulletin for J.B. Hardiman, the man seen leaving the parking lot in a hurry just minutes before Vicky was found.
I was late leaving, hadn't had my wife didn't fix no lunch, and I went by the chicken place and got me a box of chicken. Come back down there, and they were running the papers. I got me a paper and take off.
Hardiman was a minister, but made his living peddling fish from the back of his truck. Police caught up with him in the nearby town of Snyder.
Well, we got a warrant for your arrest. So for what? For running over a girl in Big Spring and leaving the scene of the accident. Running over a girl in Big Spring.
Snyder police put Hardiman in a jail cell, where he overheard officers talking on the phone.
I heard him talking to Big Spring. He told me I went over that truck with a fine-tooth comb, and I can't find nothing but one little spot. I did find one little spot of blood, and that kind of shook me up when he said that.
After almost 3 weeks in a coma, Vicky regained consciousness. She suffered severe damage to her skull and one eye. She could not walk or even speak. As time went by, Vicky's condition slowly improved. One day, Crystal took Vicky to the newspaper office to see everyone who had been concerned about her.
When are you coming back? Still not talking.
When one of the employees leaned into the car to say hello, Vicky reacted violently.
Be a couple times a week.
It was the first time Vicky had spoken since the accident.
And Vicky just started kicking and screaming, you know, what little voice could come out, you know, that was the first sign of a voice, actually. It was just this, it wasn't even a clear voice, it was just more of a screech type thing.
But Vicky was not well enough to explain her reaction. Crystal decided to conduct her own investigation. Crystal believed the answer to the mystery of what happened to Vicky were those marks on Vicky's face. Marks which hospital employees identified as tire marks.
I just started thinking, you know, what would the police do?
Crystal made a list of all vehicles she could remember seeing in the newspaper parking lot prior to Vicky's accident. Then she needed to find a way to compare the marks on Vicky's face to the tires of those vehicles. Crystal rubbed black shoe polish on each tire and then pressed plain white paper against it. She kept careful records of which tire impression came from each vehicle. In all, she took 9 tire impressions from 2 vans and a pickup truck. Then she showed her detective work to the police.
I said, you arrested the wrong person. I said, you've harassed a black man who was just a sweet, harmless old man who never done anything wrong to anybody. And I said, you need to, fix this.
The grand jury questioned Reverend Hardiman but did not indict him. The spot of blood on the truck turned out to be fish blood. Crystal did not believe Reverend Hardiman was the one who ran over Vicky. But police refused to investigate further, saying it was a civil matter, not a criminal one. At the time, the newspaper's parking lot was unpaved and bumpy. It was possible that a driver may have driven over Vicky and mistaken the bump for a pothole.
By the time they got out there, all they had was an empty parking lot. They didn't really have any eyewitnesses. In fact, there were no eyewitnesses.
And for the next 3 years, as she nursed Vicky back to health, no one in the small town of Big Spring was willing to help her. One day, while reading a magazine, Crystal saw an article about a man known as the Sherlock Holmes of tire marks. This was the break that Crystal had been praying for. Peter McDonald literally wrote the book on tire impression evidence. He was formerly the chief designer for the Firestone Tire Company. He also assisted numerous police agencies and taught at the FBI Academy. After reading the magazine article about McDonald, Crystal Lyons called him in Ohio. She explained the case as best she could and told him about the pictures she had taken, which appeared to show a tire mark. Luckily for the Lyons family, McDonald was no stranger to tire impressions in human flesh.
My heart went out to her with this almost like tattoo on her forehead.
With the evidence Crystal had gathered, McDonald thought he could help.
I think it's amazing that she had the foresight to make rubbings of suspect tires. I don't always get that sort of work from police on a major homicide case.
Crystal had labeled each of the tire impressions with the date and its position on the vehicle.
2 of the vehicles I could eliminate very quickly. One was a big snow tire type design. Another was a passenger design, but it had major grooves that were kind of lightning shaped, which was different than the imprint on Vicky's forehead.
But the last 3 imprints were interesting. They were Golden Sonic 78s, a relatively rare tire no longer manufactured. The imprint on Vicky's face looked similar, but McDonald wasn't sure that the size matched.
The same tread pattern appears in as normally about 12 different sizes. So it's important to me to confirm that it's not only the same manufacturer, the same brand, but that it has exactly the same size.
But Crystal's photographs did not contain a size reference. How could McDonald determine the size of a tire impression on Vicky's face taken 3 years earlier? Another photograph was taken, this time with a scale reference. The human skull grows most rapidly in the first 3 years of life. But between the ages of 4 and 7, the distance between the eye sockets and mouth usually remain the same. This knowledge helped McDonald to compare these 2 photographs with a scale of reference. On Vicky's forehead, McDonald saw tiny lines made by tire sipes, which are narrow cuts put in the tire to improve traction.
And they are a forensic scientist's greatest tool because I can help determine the wear of the tire.
Sipes are made by small metal blades placed in the tire mold. To make the tire stronger, the blades sometimes have a small indentation, creating a raised area of rubber called a tie bar. As the tread wears, the tie bar is exposed and the tire's imprint changes. In Vicky's skin, McDonald found interruptions in the sipes caused by the exposed tie bar. He determined the tire had worn down about 5/100ths of an inch. 2 of the Sonic 78 imprints could now be eliminated since they had very little wear. But the last imprint showed the same degree of wear and matched in size. McDonald believed that the right front tire of a newspaper truck driven by an employee we'll call Bob Jones had run over Vicky. Jones was the man who said hello to Vicky after the accident, when Vicky had reacted violently. In 1985, Crystal Lyons filed suit against the Big Spring Herald, claiming that Jones hadn't taken the proper precautions while backing his truck out of the parking lot. The unfortunate accident would mean a lifetime of neurological difficulties for Vicky, and Crystal wanted justice. Vicky Lyons needed dozens of surgical procedures because the accident damaged her hearing, vision, and sense of balance, but she was able to attend school.
They just asked me if I'm like mentally retarded or if I had a stroke. But I don't mind people asking me because I'd rather them ask me what happened than like sit there and stare at me.
There was no way to just do what the doctors had suggested, which is put her in a wheelchair and just forget her. I couldn't do that. She's my child. I love her.
Crystal Lyons says she didn't sue the Big Spring Herald just for financial motives. She wanted them to take responsibility for the accident that left her daughter permanently disabled.
I wanted everybody to know the truth. And it came down to the point where in order for Vicky to get the appropriate medical attention and to stay where she was at and get good medical attention and have a life, that money was going to be involved.
Vicky Lyons tries not to think about the accident, but she remembers it.
I remember my mom's boss telling me to go play in the parking lot, and I had some toy dishes with me, and I went behind this truck. I was just playing in the sand.
On the day of the accident, the driver of the vehicle, in a rush, backed out over Vicky in the unpaved, bumpy parking lot. Apparently without realizing it.
I saw him like look in his rearview mirror. But before I knew it, then I guess, well, I was 4 years old. I didn't know what to do.
Even before the lawsuit, Jones suspected he might have been the one who ran over Vicky.
The driver made comment to Crystal that he did not think he did it, but if he did it, that he was sorry that it happened.
All I can say is, it's done, it's over with. I don't like they did that, but
I'm willing to forgive him because I'm no person to judge. So, and he's got to live with what he's done.
The Herald wanted to settle the case. The newspaper offered to pay $750,000 towards the care Vicki would need for the rest of her life. Crystal accepted, but demanded one more thing. 15 minutes in the judge's chambers for her and Vicki to meet with a representative of the Herald, alone.
Vicki, I asked her if she had anything to say to him, and she told him, "You destroyed my life." That was pretty much, well, the end of the lawsuit right then and there.
The Big Spring Herald did not report the news of this settlement. The paper now has new owners and a completely different staff.
Crystal had the insight to take the photographs. She had the insight to get the tire imprints. She had the insight to tear out this piece of paper in the magazine that had Peter McDonald's name on it. Without her having done all of that, obviously I don't think any of this would have gotten done.
Peter McDonald is more than a forensic specialist. He's also an artist, and his paintings and sketches cover the walls of his home. Some of his works are inspired by the many cases he has helped to solve. One is based on the photo of a young girl he never met. Over the past 20 years, he has wondered what happened to her.
In a case like this, you do get emotionally involved.
Crystal was able to arrange for the best medical care for Vicki, and Vicki has learned to speak and walk again. Although Vicki tries to put the accident in the past, she lives with its legacy every day.
I like getting out, but I don't always get out that much because I don't like how people make me feel when I go out somewhere.
But Vicki is thinking about getting out more. She's finished high school and is considering college. Her mother, now divorced, is already attending college in Denver, studying forensic science.
I really applaud that. I bet she'll be really good in the section on how to make imprints.
They were a beautiful family, a striking raven-haired couple with their delightful little girl.
I'm gonna take Devin to the store for a little while. I'll be back in a few.
In 1995, mother and daughter left home for a shopping trip and were never seen again. The search for answers would lead investigators into a world of evil, fantasy, and perversion. Peace and quiet. That's what attracts many to Limerick, Pennsylvania, a small town an hour's drive from Philadelphia. People who live in Limerick say it's a wonderful place to raise a family. Jimmy and Lisa Mandarak lived here with their 19-month-old daughter, Devin. Since Jimmy and Lisa both worked full-time, weekends were an important time to relax, have fun, and enjoy one another. On a Sunday afternoon in September of 1995, Lisa told her husband that she and Devin were going shopping.
I'll be back in a few. I don't need this.
She said she wouldn't be gone long. Jimmy stayed home watching football. By dinner time, Lisa and the baby hadn't come home.
Jimmy said that his wife had handed him the diaper bag and said, "I'll be right back." In other words, I won't be long enough to need a diaper. When she wasn't back that fast, he started panicking, and no one else could understand why he was panicking.
Well, I thought he was overreacting. When we hung up, I realized it was a Sunday, and I thought, where could she have possibly went being this late? So I did call the police.
Family and friends told police that the Mandaraks were happily married.
Jimmy and Lisa had this relationship where if one was gone for an hour, so they called each other and that, "I'm here, I'm on my way, we went to here."
To see if Lisa may have run off with the baby, police checked to see if her luggage or toiletries were missing, but they were not. Jimmy told police his wife said she was going to a shopping center about 10 miles from their home. When police arrived, they found Lisa's car in the parking lot. There were no signs of foul play. Lisa and Devin were nowhere in sight. The grocery store was the only one still open, and family members searched through the entire store.
And I said to the girl, "Please page Lisa Mandrak." And when she didn't come, I knew right away something was wrong. I went out and I said to my sister, "She's not in there."
Later that afternoon, police received some terrible news. Some hikers in nearby Valley Forge National Park found the body of a baby girl.
They were walking along a trail at the base of an embankment. The embankment was approximately 50 yards up to one of the access roads. So the baby's body was between the top of the embankment at the road and the walking trail.
The child appeared to have been tossed from the road above. She was fully clothed, but bruises were clearly visible. Jimmy Mandarak's brother positively identified the body.
I kept saying, "It can't be Devin because where's Lisa?" My husband said to me, it's Devin. I was pretty much not sure, and I said, my first words were, "How did she die?"
An autopsy revealed that Devin had been manually strangled to death. But investigators found no forensic evidence on the body, not a single clothing fiber or hair.
I have a little 7-month-old daughter. I can't even imagine. I can't even come close to imagining.
The news stunned family members and everyone in the little town of Limerick.
Well, ordinarily, young children are victims of a parent or a paramour or something like that, and it's a heat of passion thing, or baby cried too much, something like that.
I have to admit, in this case, I found it very unusual that Jimmy was not able to go in and look at his daughter. And I admit that that intensified my suspicion that perhaps Jimmy was involved in Devin's death.
Despite the suspicions, Jimmy Mandarak denied any involvement with his daughter's death or his wife's disappearance. As night fell, police feared they would never find Lisa Mandarak alive. Jimmy Mandarak said he was at home alone watching football on the day his daughter was murdered and his wife disappeared.
They were his everything to him. I think that it would have been hard for him to wake up any day and imagine them not being there, you know, when they weren't. It really, literally ripped his heart out.
Jimmy said he gave Devin a cookie and some pretzels before she left with Lisa for the store.
At first, there was some question, naturally, what we could do to verify his story. When we found her car, the cookie and the pretzel rod were in the car. It may not be of any scientific value, but it helps verify the story.
And one of the neighbors said that Jimmy's car was at home all afternoon, which confirmed his alibi. Investigators looked into other leads.
The fact that the car is parked there leads us to believe that Devin and Lisa reached the parking lot. Now, were they abducted at that point? Did they go in? Were they abducted on the way out?
They learned that a local motorcycle gang met that day near the shopping center and wondered if Lisa and Devin might have had some sort of contact with them. Jimmy's beautiful young wife would have been an easy target.
Lisa was gorgeous, very pretty. She was like Snow White. She had black hair, very fair skin. She was just very pretty.
An intense search for Lisa began in Valley Forge National Park the day after Devin's body was discovered there. Helicopters, bloodhounds, and a cadaver dog combed the 3,500-acre site.
No one should go through a day that my brother went through that day. No one. I couldn't tell you what it was like for him, but I know what it was like to be with him, and it was awful.
At the shopping center, police asked employees and customers if they had seen anything suspicious the day before. No one recalled seeing Devin, Lisa, or any members of the motorcycle gang. There were 2 children's stores at the shopping center. Employees at Annie Says did not recognize Lisa or Devin as customers from the day before. But a shopper at Your Kids and Mine said she remembered seeing them inside that store around 3:30 on Sunday as she was paying for her items.
We were able to track down that transaction off the journal tape in the cash register. In fact, that was the last entry on the cash register journal tape for that day. So we were able to say exactly what time that woman made her purchase and knew that Devin and Lisa were alive in that store.
Your Kids and Mine was owned by a woman named Ruth Fairley. Her 22-year-old son, Caleb, had been working alone in the store that Sunday. Police contacted Caleb Fairley by telephone. He told them he hadn't seen anyone resembling Lisa and Devin in the store, but he agreed to meet with detectives to look at photographs. When he arrived at police headquarters, investigators noticed that he was wearing makeup.
I went and got a wet paper towel and asked him if he would wipe the makeup off his face.
Why don't you wipe some of that off?
It literally made my hair stand on end because you could see that they were perfect scratches from fingernails coming across his face.
Fairley told police he had been out marsh dancing the night before and that someone had accidentally scratched him. Marsh dancing was a popular fad at the time, which involved a crowd of dancers slamming into one another. Investigators discovered that Fairley had told friends something different.
He initially said, oh, I had to break up a fight at work. You know, I took the trash out the back and there was a fight in the alley, I had to break it up. You know, there were 3 guys on one, I had to break it up. You know, it was very like, oh, well, you know, that's kind of a chivalrous, nice thing to do, you know, helping somebody out of trouble.
A background check revealed that Caleb Fairley was a former high school choir boy with no past history of criminal violence. But in 1992, he had been accused of sexual harassment.
There was a female jogging along the road where Caleb pulled up next to her and then made lewd remarks to her as to some things that he would like to do to her.
Friends described Fairley as peculiar. He lived with his parents, was a loner, and was fascinated with vampires.
This is a very scary guy. We ultimately served a search warrant on his home, and we found out that he was a real pervert, had all kinds of strange sexual devices and various other perverted stuff.
He spent most of his time reading pornography and playing fantasy games like Dungeons and Dragons.
We have encountered numerous people, particularly people in somewhat unusual murders like this, who are either devotees or dabblers in the Dungeons and Dragons game. There are may be some connection between that type of role-playing game that need to live in a fantasy world.
The reason we game is because we want to be heroic. Not everyone can be a fireman or policeman. Not everyone can be a soldier. Not everyone can be Indiana Jones. So for the rest of us, we read books, we play games, we daydream.
Friends say Fairley would often dress up as a vampire in order to live out a fantasy depicted on one of his T-shirts, a vampire ravishing a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Lisa Mandarach.
He had a thing for women of a certain appearance. In a number of the game products, that particular appearance is idealized. It had to do with very pale skin, people were very thin, quite often they'd have darker hair. The fact that that particular physical stereotype was in vogue, it would show up in all the artwork.
Fairley denied any involvement in Devon's murder and Lisa's disappearance. Was it possible that Fairley had more to hide than scratches? There were no signs of a struggle inside the clothing store where Lisa Mandarach was last seen. But detectives did find some clues. A shopper said she saw someone vacuuming in the store late Sunday afternoon, just minutes before it closed. And the local news crew reported seeing the same thing early the next morning. In the store's vacuum cleaner, police found several strands of long brunette hair which had been forcibly removed. Without a body, it was impossible to tell whether it was Lisa's. To analyze the carpet, investigators used an ultraviolet light which causes certain substances like bodily fluids to fluoresce. In the back part of the store, the ultraviolet light revealed several suspicious stains. The stains were saliva, which tests showed was from little Devon Mandarach. And there were other stains nearby, which turned out to be semen. A blood sample taken from Caleb Fairley matched the semen found on the carpet of the store. Although this was certainly an unusual piece of evidence to find in a clothing store, it wasn't proof of a sexual crime. And police could find no physical evidence that Lisa Mandarach had been inside the store.
If we didn't find Lisa, all we would have is a weird guy with scratches on his face who lies a little bit, and you didn't have anything to tie him to the crime. So finding her body was of utmost importance.
Police confronted Fairley with the potentially incriminating evidence found in the store. Then, a shocking revelation. Fairley said he knew where Lisa was and offered to lead police to her, but only if prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty if Lisa was found been murdered.
The only mistake that he makes is agreeing to lead us to the body. That turns out to be a mistake, but at the time, given the information that he had, that was the right logical decision for he and his lawyer to make. Turns out they were wrong, but their error was to our benefit.
Prosecutors accepted the terms, and Fairley led police to an industrial area near the store. In an overgrown wooded lot next to the health club Fairley belonged to, police found Lisa's body in heavy brush. Lisa was naked, except for a black lace top pulled up around her neck. The body was posed in a sexually suggestive position with her hair covering her face.
It's not unusual to have someone try to cover the face of their victim, almost as if they're trying to hide from the gaze of their dead victim.
And Lisa's hands showed signs of trauma. Some of her fingernails were broken. Others had been completely ripped off.
She was found in a sexually suggestive way. He's a pervert, that fits. He's the last one to see them alive. He has scratches on his face, and he lies about it. That's enough to arrest him.
It's a double homicide. A little kid and a mother. The society feels so uneasy. The family need the answer.
The autopsy revealed that Lisa had been manually strangled. Her body was badly bruised, her ribs broken. Tests also showed that Lisa may have been sexually assaulted. Scientists discovered some foreign fibers on Lisa's blouse. They were microscopically similar to fibers from the shirt Fairley was seen wearing on the day of the crime. The hair found in the store's vacuum cleaner was compared to Lisa's hair and was also found to be microscopically similar. Finally, investigators subjected the biological material found under Lisa's fingernails to a DNA test.
Any type of case, you should look at a victim's fingernail. And when two people have a physical contact, may have transfer. Now, transfer may leave the suspect's blood tissue in the victim's fingernail.
That test revealed the skin under Lisa's fingernails belonged to Caleb Fairley. Caleb Fairley was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, aggravated assault, theft, and abuse of a corpse. Prosecutors believed that Fairley lived in a fantasy world and that Lisa Mandarak matched his image of the perfect woman. When Fairley saw Lisa and realized that she and Devin were the only shoppers left in the store, he locked the door. The forensic evidence shows that Fairley attacked Lisa behind some high clothing racks out of street view. But Fairley underestimated Lisa's strength. She fought desperately for her life and that of her daughter, scratching and clawing at Fairley's face. During the struggle, Lisa's ribs were broken and her body badly bruised before she was strangled to death. Afterwards, Fairley strangled the baby. Saliva from the baby leaked onto the carpet, and fibers from Fairley's shirt were transferred onto Lisa's blouse. There is evidence that Fairley sexually assaulted her. Fairley washed and vacuumed the carpet that night and again the next morning. He carried the bodies out the back door. He drove to Valley Forge National Park and dropped Devin's body there. Then he drove to the industrial park, where he elaborately posed Lisa's body. Fairley's cleanup attempts weren't able to hide the forensic evidence of the struggle and the biological evidence under Lisa's fingernails. Caleb Fairley pled guilty to the charges, but claimed the murders were not premeditated. The jury didn't agree.
It takes a very long time to strangle somebody to death. You have to cut off the blood flow to the brain for 4 minutes. That's a long time.
Fairley was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms.
Caleb Fairley is an evil man, and evil people have evil thoughts. So this fantasy woman walked into the store, and his evilness drove him to commit these terrible crimes.
To this day, the Mandarak family is still haunted by the cruel and senseless murders.
Why Devin? Yeah, Devin doesn't make sense to me. You can almost picture as to what occurred between Caleb and Lisa, but Devin was less than 2 years old.
I'd like to buy him a weekend furlough, give him to my brother Jimmy. That's all I think of.
The saliva, the hair, and the DNA evidence told the story that Lisa and Devin Mandarak could not.
If we did not have the forensic evidence that we got from Lisa Mandarak's body, Caleb Fairley would almost certainly be walking around out there free right now.
I keep the mugshot photograph of Caleb Fairley with those scratches across his face in my top desk drawer. And it's just as a constant reminder of the evil that's out in this world.
The song is called The Cheater. You're Bob Cuban and the Inmen.
In the 1960s, for lead singer Walter Scott, The Cheater became both his signature song and a hit single. But like so many others, Walter Scott was a one-hit wonder, never able to repeat the success with another song. After 14 straight years of performing on the road, mostly one-nighters, Walter Scott disappeared. Many believed that the lyrics, "Watch out for the cheater," weren't just words, but an omen. The famous arch in St. Louis, Missouri stands as a symbolic gateway, recalling its role as the last stop for pioneers before heading west. Later, St. Louis became a well-known stop along America's music corridor, which included Memphis and New Orleans. Pop legends Chuck Berry and Tina Turner launched their careers here, as did a local boy, Walter Scott. Walter Scott was the lead singer for the rock and roll band Bob Cuban and the In-Men. In 1966, the group started recording and gained national attention thanks to Walter's stage presence and vocal range.
Wally could have been doing the showrooms in Las Vegas, let's put it that way. His chops were so good, that last rehearsal we had, I couldn't believe it. I mean, the guy just blew me away. I had no idea his voice had gotten that good.
Eventually, the band's signature song, The Cheater, reached number 12 on the Billboard chart. Along with the notoriety came the women.
You take a good-looking guy, and he's like a movie star back then, you know, to a lot of women, I'm sure. And, you know, he liked the ladies.
Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Walter continued to sing with various bands throughout the United States, doing what are called one-nighters. This kept Walter away from home for most of the time.
Anyway, this song sold over 1 million copies, and my way of saying thank you is to sing it for you.
It wasn't long before Walter's life mimicked the lyrics of his hit song, Watch Out for the Cheater. While Walter was married to his first wife, Doris, he was having an affair with a girl he met while on the road, Joanne Calcutta. It wasn't long before Walter divorced Doris and married Joanne, although his family didn't approve.
Joanne was false. She was false from day one. Everything was Joanne, Joanne, Joanne.
I still didn't feel like I could trust her. And I didn't think she was good for Wally, but what could I do?
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Suzanne Flynn.
With Walter's travel schedule, his second marriage didn't work out any better than his first, and he got involved in a sexual relationship with one of his dancers, Suzanne Flynn. Not surprisingly, Walter wasn't the only one cheating. His wife Joanne was having an affair with an electrician, Jim Williams, whom she met while he was doing some work in her home.
She was really down about Walter being on the road a lot because he was only home like about 10, 12 weeks out of the year.
Jim Williams was cheating too. He had been married to his wife Sharon for 20 years.
It was like Peyton Place. Everybody was running around with each other's wives, husbands.
In October of 1983, the Williams family received some terrible news. Sharon Williams had been in a serious automobile accident. Her car had run off the road and down an embankment just a few miles from her home. When help arrived, there was a grass fire a foot high burning beside the car. Sharon was on the floor of the car. She was unconscious and barely alive.
Somewhere around 7:30 in the evening, I get a call from the sheriff's department. Told me that my wife had been in a bad car accident, not to leave the house, and an officer would come out and pick me up.
There was only minor damage to the car, but Sharon had received a serious head injury. She was rushed to a local hospital. There wasn't much that could be done. Her skull was fractured. She never regained consciousness.
The doctor comes to me. He said, we can pull the plug and let her go, or you can leave the plug plugged in and keep her like this for years. Well, what are you going to do?
Jim Williams took her off life support the following day. No autopsy was performed. 2 months later, there was more bad news, this time for Walter Scott's family. It was Christmas time, and Walter Scott had just returned home from his concert tour to spend the holidays with his wife and children. Friends said that Walter didn't appear to be himself, that he was distracted. 2 days after Christmas, Joanne Scott called police to report Walter missing. She said he had left for a garage to get a new battery for his car and that he had not returned home. The owner of the garage said Walter never arrived. The next day, the police found Walter's automobile abandoned in a parking lot at the St. Louis airport. But none of the flight manifests listed Walter Scott as a passenger. When Walter Scott was first reported missing, his father wasn't terribly concerned. Walter had a reputation for taking quick trips out of town.
I didn't figure there was nothing wrong with it, but my wife says, something wrong with Walter. I said, hell, he'll be home. He'll be come showing up.
The next day, Walter's parents visited their son's home and were surprised by what they saw. Jim Williams was sitting at the kitchen table going through Walter's jewelry case. He looked as if he was evaluating the quality of Walter's jewelry. 2 of Walter's guns were sitting on the edge of the table. His third, a .22 caliber pistol, was missing. And police learned that Jim Williams' car had been parked in front of Joanne's home the entire night before. Joanne insisted that Jim had slept on the sofa. Walter was missing for only 24 hours before Joanne called Walter's manager, canceling his performances for the next 9 weeks. 2 days later, Jim Williams and Joanne Scott drove to Pennsylvania, where they looked through the band's trailer for any personal items Walter may have left behind. While there, they shared a motel room.
We stayed in a motel together. She was in this bed and I was in this bed. She never took her clothes off. I took my shirt off. I had a t-shirt under.
The search for Walter Scott continued throughout the spring and summer. No family member or fellow musicians had seen or heard from him. The trail had turned cold.
I had doubts. I really did. I had doubts that we would ever find him.
I held out. I thought that Wally had taken off. The last thing on my mind was that something had happened to him.
Desperate for any help she could find, Walter's mother even consulted a psychic.
And he told me that he's in cold, cold water. It's not moving water. And there's a big red barrel or something red by the side of the road where he's at, and he's not far from home.
It was then that Mrs. Notice had an inkling of where Walter might be.
And Jim Williams had a red door on his house.
Police searched Jim Williams' property but found nothing suspicious. 9 months after Walter disappeared, Joanne filed for divorce, citing abandonment and adultery. Joanne then married Jim Williams. At about this same time, there were some big changes being made at the medical examiner's office in St. Louis. A forensic pathologist was hired to conduct autopsies on all suspicious deaths. Dr. Mary Case was the new forensic pathologist.
So they asked me if I would look at an old case that they had, and they brought me this, it was like a 2-foot stack of material.
It was the Sharon Williams automobile accident case.
The car accident was rather a minimal front-end collision, and there was no explanation for why she should have any kind of impact injuries to the back of her head.
There were a number of suspicious elements in this accident. The driver's side door was wide open. The driver's seat pushed back as far as it could go, yet Sharon Williams was not a tall woman. There was no damage to the car's fuel line, yet a grass fire burned near the car. And in the emergency room, nurses reported a strong smell of gasoline on Sharon's body. With so many unanswered questions, Dr. Case ordered Sharon Williams' body exhumed for an autopsy. The body told a far different story than the accident report.
There were 2 blunt impacts to the back of her head that caused vertical lacerations and very massive skull fracturing. This is not consistent with a head-on collision of a very minor nature. So her death was then considered a homicide.
Dr. Case believes that a pipe or crowbar caused these head injuries, not the automobile accident. But who had orchestrated Sharon's death to look like an accident?
I didn't kill Sharon Williams.
But police weren't too sure. Once Sharon Williams' death was ruled a homicide, her ex-husband Jim became the prime suspect. Police also suspected that Walter Scott's disappearance was somehow connected. By this time, Walter had been missing for 3 years. When police heard that Jim Williams' estranged son, Jimmy, was serving time in a Florida prison for an unrelated crime, they decided to pay him a visit. During questioning, Jimmy Jr. made some provocative statements about the 3-year search for Walter Scott's whereabouts.
He was kind of sarcastic. He, I guess, was kind of making fun of the police, making comments like, you guys aren't smart enough to figure this out. It was cold. The rivers were frozen. The lakes were frozen. You couldn't, the ground was frozen. Where would my dad get rid of a body? He was very, very suspicious that his father built a flower box over the cistern, and that cistern has been exposed his whole life.
Police took out a warrant to search Jim Williams' home. The cistern was in the backyard, covered with concrete. There was a flower box on top.
Upon taking the cover off the flower box, we immediately noticed that the cistern was full of water. After looking down inside the cistern, we could see what appeared to be a body floating on top of the water in the same type of jogging suit that Joanne had reported Walter wearing the last time he was seen.
After the body was removed, the cistern was drained. There were several large concrete blocks at the bottom, along with a sealed plastic bag with Walter's credit cards and driver's license.
Walter's body was bound with a yellow rope. The wrists were bound, the knees were bound, and the ankles were bound. And there was a length of that rope extending from the body that had a large loop tied in it, surmising that it was tied to some bricks that were in the bottom of the cistern.
Walter Scott's autopsy revealed he had been shot in the back. Because of the severe decomposition, it was impossible to determine what type of weapon was used.
I didn't kill Walter Scott. If I'm going to kill a man, I'm going to shoot him right between the eyes. I ain't going to take a chance of missing the heart and shooting him in the back.
Walter's family believes that he was murdered at home.
I'll tell you the reason why. Every time he'd come in the house, he took off his shoes. When they found his body, he was fully clothed. Even his socks were still on his feet, but no shoes.
Jim Williams was arrested and charged with the murder of both Walter Scott and his wife Sharon. Joanne Williams was also charged in Walter's murder. Kay and Walter Notice entombed their son at the Valhalla Mausoleum in St. Louis. After 3 years in a cistern underwater, they wanted to keep his body above ground. With Jim Williams and their ex-daughter-in-law awaiting trial, they believed the worst was behind them, or so they thought. Jim Williams and Joanne Williams were tried separately for murder. Jim Williams' trial was first. Prosecutors believe that on October 19, 1983, Jim and Sharon Williams got into some kind of argument, possibly about Jim's affair with Joanne. The argument at some point turned violent. She was hit twice in the back of the head, fracturing her skull, causing massive internal bleeding. To make the death look like an accident, prosecutors say Jim placed Sharon's body in her car and drove down the embankment. He then set fire to the grass nearby and fled the scene before police arrived. With Sharon out of the way, the only one standing between Jim and Joanne was Walter. The forensic evidence shows that Walter was shot in the back with a high-velocity pistol. Walter's body was placed in the cistern on Jim Williams' property. There were no eyewitnesses. The murder weapon was never identified. The rope which bound Walter Scott did not match rope in the Williams garage. However, witnesses saw Jim Williams pouring concrete over the cistern and building the flower box a few weeks after Walter's disappearance in 20-degree weather during a snowstorm. No one knows how Walter Scott's car found its way to the airport, or how Williams got home after his wife's accident. Jim Williams said he was innocent and took the stand in his own defense. For the first time, he revealed he had seen Walter on the night he disappeared.
I went on into Ken's Auto Supply and come out, and I seen Walter standing over there with some guy, a big guy, you know, a big black coat and a black hat, you know. They were talking while the guy was in the coat got in a Cadillac, a black Cadillac, and Walter pulled out right behind him.
But Williams had no explanation for how Walter's body mysteriously found its way into the cistern. Jim Williams was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. With only circumstantial evidence against Joanne Williams, her trial never made it to court. In a plea agreement, prosecutors dropped the murder charge against Joanne in exchange for a guilty plea to the felony charge of hindering the prosecution. Joanne was sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. She was released after serving only 18 months. In his first television interview since his arrest, Jim Williams still maintains his innocence and now says his son may have had something to do with Walter's murder.
How did my son know he was back there? Jimmy says it was a guess. Awful good guess.
Kay and Walter Notice are appalled that their former daughter-in-law served only 18 months in prison.
There's only one person that would ever get close enough to Wally to killing without him even suspected it, and that would be Joanne. And that's the reason I think that Joanne was the one that shot Wally.
Walter Scott is missed by his family, friends, and those who loved his talent, his wit, and his spirit.
I listen to his records all the time. And golly, when you walk in the stores and they're playing the songs that he sang all the time, it used to bother me, but it doesn't now. It makes me feel good.
He really made it good in the music business. But I still don't understand how he can remember all those words.
This man, Akeem Joseph Marino.
In 1998, Akeem Marino came forward and confessed to the rape and murder of a restaurant worker.
I did this awful crime and I was alone.
But this man, Chris Ochoa, had already confessed to that crime and was serving a life sentence.
I pleaded guilty and confessed.
One of them was lying. To find out who and why, scientists look once more at the forensic evidence. Austin, Texas, the state's capital city. 20-year-old Nancy DePriest lived here with her husband, Todd, and 15-month-old daughter, Sylvia.
She was so very friendly and very open to anyone. She just loved people. She was just like a people person.
Nancy was a waitress at a Pizza Hut restaurant. On October 24th, 1988, she arrived for work at 7 a.m. Her job was to get the pizza dough ready for lunch before the rest of the employees arrived. The manager of the restaurant called several times that morning to make sure everything was all right, but there was no answer. When he stopped by the restaurant around 9:30, he found Nancy slumped under the bathroom sink, nude and barely alive. She had been shot in the back of the head. Nancy was rushed to the nearest hospital.
My son-in-law said, "Mom, there's been a robbery. They shot Nancy." I said, "Todd, how bad is she hurt?" He broke down and he said, "Mom, she's on life support."
Nancy died later that day without regaining consciousness.
I began to scream. I was totally hysterical.
The murder occurred before the restaurant opened, so there were no witnesses to the crime. The Austin Police Department found no signs of forced entry at the restaurant. The motive appeared to be robbery, since money was missing from the safe. On the floor of the bathroom, police found a .22 caliber shell casing from the murder weapon, and Nancy's autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted. 2 weeks later, investigators got their first break in the case. 2 employees from another Pizza Hut restaurant, 22-year-old Chris Ochoa and 19-year-old Richard Danzinger, went to the restaurant where Nancy had been murdered.
So we ordered a beer and he toasted to the memory of Nancy.
To Nancy the priest, we won't forget you.
To me, I found it kind of strange.
Nancy's co-workers quickly informed authorities. Ochoa and Danziger were later questioned by police.
He started grilling me about what I know about this murder and this rape, and I told him nothing. We went round and round for a couple hours. I don't recall how many hours. But he said, at one point, he said, you know what? We know you're not capable of this, but we know you know something.
Detective Hector Polanco, at the time a 12-year veteran of the force, took over the interrogation.
At one point, he showed me pictures of death row. He showed them to me. He said, this is where you will live until you die. So I still kept on saying, I don't know anything.
Richard Danziger and his girlfriend, Donna Angstad, were also questioned.
They were absolutely horrible to me. One time, Hector Polanco pounded his fist on the table, and I thought he was coming across to grab me. I came up out of my chair and hit the wall behind me. It scared me so bad.
Donna said she and Richard were together in Donna's apartment at the time of the murder.
I took a lie detector test, and they told me I flunked it.
2 days later, Chris Ochoa confessed to the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest.
I did it. I pleaded guilty. And it was, I can't describe it.
He also revealed that his friend, Richard Danziger, was his accomplice. Ochoa said he and Danziger entered the restaurant with keys the two had obtained. They found Nancy alone, preparing pizza dough. After ordering her to remove the money from the safe, Ochoa said he and Danziger bound, gagged, raped, and shot her. Ochoa said he was the one who pulled the trigger. When the DNA results came back from the lab, police had even more proof that Ochoa and Danziger were the killers. Chris Ochoa not only confessed to the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest, he became the state's star witness against his friend and co-worker, Richard Danziger. Nancy's family was relieved that the case was concluded quickly.
Not so much satisfaction. I didn't feel that. I guess relief that they weren't going to be able to do it to someone else.
Bolstering Ochoa's confession was the DNA evidence. A blood sample from Chris Ochoa matched the DNA from semen on the victim's vaginal swab.
I examined a vaginal swab specimen from Nancy DePriest. DNA was extracted from spermatozoa on that swab, and then DNA typing was done using a single gene that we had available at that point in time. And a result was obtained from that gene that was actually compatible with Chris Ochoa and about 10 to 16% of the population.
Statistically, there were 3 million other Texans who might have shared the same genetic marker. But this wasn't the only forensic evidence. A brown hair found in the restaurant bathroom was microscopically similar to Danziger's. Richard Danziger pled not guilty and insisted he was innocent. But the strength of Ochoa's confession and the forensic evidence were too great. The jury deliberated just 7.5 minutes and found Richard Danziger guilty of aggravated sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison. In return for his testimony, Chris Ochoa avoided the death penalty, but he was sentenced to life in prison.
There were nights that I would sit in my bed crying to God. Why? Why? I would ask him, I'm tired, God. Tired. was very tired. And at some point, I wanted to end it all.
Life in prison was even harder for Richard Danziger. After 3 years behind bars, Danziger was assaulted by another inmate who mistook him for someone else. Danziger was kicked in the head with steel-tipped boots. He survived, but suffered permanent brain damage.
It's just, what's happened to him is horrible. He's going to need care for the rest of his life.
But the story doesn't end there. 8 years later, Austin police received a letter from Akeem Marino, who was serving 3 life sentences in another Texas prison for a string of robberies and sexual assaults. Marino claimed that he was the one who raped and murdered Nancy DePriest. Marino claimed he had undergone a spiritual awakening while incarcerated and wanted to set the record straight.
I did this awful crime and I was alone.
Marino said the El Paso Police Department had the gun he used to kill Nancy DePriest. They had taken it when he was arrested on an assault charge. Homicide detective Manuel Fuentes was assigned to investigate Marino's story.
I got a call from El Paso Police Department, and the detective there said, "You're not going to believe this, but that gun hasn't been destroyed. We still have it in evidence."
Scientists compared Marino's .22 caliber handgun to the bullet removed from Nancy DePriest. The ballistic examination did not reveal a match. It appeared there wasn't much more to investigate. 2 years later, Akeem Marino tried once again.
I want to thank Speaker Laney for your friendship.
This time, he sent a letter to then-Governor George W. Bush with a copy to the prosecutor's office.
I told him basically the same thing, that I had committed a murder in '88 at the Pizza Hut, and that there was 2 innocent men who I did not know locked up for it.
This time, Detective Fuentes visited Chris Ochoa in prison. Once again, Ochoa repeated what he had been saying for 10 years, that he and Danziger had acted alone.
And I told him, yeah, you're right, I did it. So you know what, just let me do my time.
And he said, as far as he knew, there wasn't a third person involved. It was just him and Richard that killed Nancy DePriest.
So there was little more authorities could do, especially since Ochoa's DNA matched semen found at the crime scene. It would take 1 more year before one of these men finally changed his story. For almost 11 years, Chris Ochoa continued to maintain that he and Richard Danziger were responsible for the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest. But 1 year after Akeem Marino wrote a letter to the governor's office saying he murdered Nancy DePriest, Chris Ochoa changed his story.
Did you kill Nancy DePriest?
No, ma'am.
Just tell me you did. Look me in the face and tell me you did it.
Ochoa now claimed that his confession had been coerced. He said he was physically assaulted, threatened, and denied access to an attorney during police questioning.
A female detective, an Hispanic detective. She came in and I asked her, you know, can I have an attorney? And she got real upset and said, you can't have one until you're officially charged.
In search for help, Ochoa contacted the Wisconsin Innocence Project, a group that investigates cases in which they believe an innocent person has been wrongfully convicted.
I told them, please help me. I don't know who else to turn to. You know, I think one of my closing lines was that I told them, I've lost faith in the system, but I haven't lost faith in myself.
But the founder of the Innocence Project, John Prey, wasn't sure what to think.
We called up Chris's attorney to get his side of things and say, sometimes the attorneys say, I'm concerned about this case, and he may be innocent. Unfortunately, in this case, we got the complete opposite. Chris's attorney told us we are totally wasting our time on this case. He is very guilty.
And if Chris Ochoa was innocent, why did DNA tests place him at the scene of the crime? 12 years earlier, tests could only analyze one gene from Nancy DePriest's vaginal swab, the gene called DQ-alpha. But by the year 2000, the accuracy of DNA testing had advanced to a level where 10 genes could be analyzed.
The DNA testing that I'm doing today is more complicated, harder to interpret, more discriminating.
The Wisconsin Innocence Project asked local prosecutors to send Nancy DePriest's forensic samples for more sophisticated DNA testing, which they did. 12 years after Nancy DePriest's murder, Karen Scalise compared Chris Ochoa's blood DNA to the vaginal swab taken from the crime scene.
I sort of went, oh my God, and just immediately double-checked it to myself.
Just to make sure, additional DNA testing was also done by Ed Blake, who had performed the original DNA test a decade earlier.
When that work was done, ultimately Chris Ochoa, Richard Danziger, and Nancy DePriest's husband were all eliminated as the source of the spermatozoa from Nancy DePriest.
But there was still the issue of Marino's gun. Detective Fuentes decided to send it to another lab, the Southwest Institute in Dallas, for more tests.
The shell casing, without a doubt, matched the gun that we got from Akeem Marino. And this was the shell casing that was found inside the Pizza Hut. So now we had DNA. Now we had a bullet or a shell casing that was ejected at the crime scene that matched the gun that we got from Akeem Marino.
As a last step, prosecutors compared Akeem Marino's DNA to the semen from Nancy DePriest's vaginal swab. It matched, just as Marino said it would.
Everybody says they're innocent in prison. But yeah, some of us actually are.
Akeem Marino's confession includes a chilling account of what happened the day Nancy DePriest was murdered, but it also answered many questions.
I was wearing a workman's uniform with a false name on it. And I knocked on the side door, and Miss DePriest came up and unlocked the door just before the restaurant opened.
Once inside, Marino held Nancy at gunpoint and demanded the restaurant's money.
Hey! Get into this thing. Get in there.
Then we went to the restroom where I disrobed her, then assaulted her one time. After that, I told her that I was going to handcuff her to the plumbing underneath the sink and leave her there. She got underneath the sink. I shot her in the back of the head one time with that .22 firearm.
But he made the mistake of leaving the shell casing behind.
I was looking for that shell, and I couldn't find it anywhere. After that, I went back, got my bag, packed my stuff up, and I left.
Marino says Nancy reminded him of a female guard he knew from prison, a woman he detested.
When I came out, not only did I intend to kill a whole bunch of blacks and Mexicans, but I told myself the first white woman I ran across that looked like I was going to blow her brains out. And that's exactly what I did.
But the bigger question is why Chris Ochoa would repeatedly confess to a crime he didn't commit.
You have to be a psychologist. I'm not. It's hard for me to conceive. In fact, when I first met Mr. Ochoa's attorneys and Mr. Danziger's attorneys, when they first brought me back, the first thing I asked them was, what in the world made Ochoa confess?
Most people will come and tell me, I would have never confessed that. You know what? Don't tell me that, because you weren't sitting in that chair.
Ochoa said he was threatened with the death penalty unless he confessed. a technique most law enforcement interrogation experts say is improper.
The law, fortunately or unfortunately, allows police officers to lie to individuals being interrogated.
What they can't say is, if you don't confess to me, you're going to get the death penalty, if they knew that to be a lie, or if you do confess to me, I'll make sure you don't go to prison or you don't get charged on this crime. So they can lie about the evidence and they can lie about other circumstances having to do with the interrogation, but they can't tell lies that could be regarded as promises or threats.
Ochoa said his confession included details of the crime because police showed him pictures of the crime scene before his confession.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a circumstance in which it would be appropriate, because it contaminates the suspect, and it means that if they are innocent and made the false confession, you'll never know.
Ochoa also says he was threatened physically.
Looked me up and down and said, "You're young, you've never been in jail, you're gonna be fresh meat and they're gonna have you. I'll put you in a cell where they'll have you." And to me, in my mind, that triggered off, well, they're gonna rape me.
Experts say the way to prevent police-induced false confessions is to videotape the entire interrogation. If a suspect later alleges police misconduct in the interrogation room, the videotape can be evaluated.
If Chris's confession had been videotaped from start to end, there is no way that this would have happened. First of all, the police officers undoubtedly would not have acted as they did. It would have been a deterrent to their misconduct.
Currently, only 2 states require all suspect interrogations to be videotaped, Alaska and Minnesota. The Austin Police Department changed its policy and now videotapes the interrogations in all homicide cases. After 12 years in prison, on January 16, 2001, Chris Ochoa was a free man. 2 months later, Richard Danziger was released to the care of his family. Because of the brain damage he sustained as a result of the prison fight, Richard Danziger will require specialized care for the rest of his life.
Sometimes I think about Richard and I feel very bad. I mean, because I didn't have the courage to face up whatever might come to me so that he wouldn't go to prison.
The officers involved in Chris Ochoa's interrogation have all refused to comment.
I was a little kid, they told me that police officers were there to take care of you, to protect you. I thought that they couldn't do no wrong. I thought they were honest. But I see that not all of them are.
I lost my child. I loved her so much. I miss her every day still. 13 years, I miss her every day. And Chris lost 12 years, his youth, his whole youth. Richard Danziger is brain damaged from a beating he received in prison. He's still serving that life sentence. He'll serve it out.